C.S. Lewis may very well be the most popular Christian apologist of the last century. Between his witty philosophical writings and his famous allegorical fiction, the British philosopher and English professor developed a reputation for intellectual substance that endures even till today. And while many Christians may be familiar with Lewis's famous argument for the existence of God in his book Mere Christianity, his famous moral argument, they might not be familiar with another, somewhat less popular but more philosophically substantial argument for God that Lewis presents in a different work of his book Miracles. Miracles is sometimes called Lewis's most analytical book. While many of his writings are focused on more popular level apologetics, Miracles is aimed at a slightly more academic audience and uses more abstract philosophical concepts as a result. That being said, its argument for God isn't too hard to understand, and it's really thought-provoking. So in this video, I will be unpacking C.S. Lewis's argument for God from Miracles. The argument from reason. The argument from reason starts off as an argument against naturalism. Naturalism, as Lewis defines it, is the belief that only the natural world exists. It's essentially a synonym for materialism, or the belief that only the material world exists. If everything that exists can be described in terms of the natural material world, then materialism and naturalism are true. So if we can find something that's in principle not explainable in terms of the material world, then naturalism must be false. Notice that I'm not saying that if we can find something that hasn't yet been explained by the natural material world, then naturalism must be false. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying very specifically that if there's something that could not be explained by natural forces, even in principle, that would disprove naturalism. And C.S. Lewis thinks that there is something like that, something that we observe as a real feature of the world that could never possibly be explained by purely natural forces. And that is the existence and reliability of human reason. We know that reason must be reliable. After all, everything that we hold to be true, we hold on the promise that reason is reliable. If it turns out that reason was not a good source of knowledge, then we wouldn't be able to obtain knowledge. An argument, Lewis argues, that leads to the conclusion that reason is unreliable would be an argument which proved that no argument was sound, a proof that there is no such thing as proofs, and therefore an argument that destroys itself, that shoots itself in the foot. It's totally illogical to accept any argument that leads to the conclusion that reason itself is unreliable, because if reason isn't trustworthy, nothing is. But naturalism, Lewis argues, does exactly that. It destroys the reliability of reason. After all, doesn't naturalism claim that all of our thoughts are totally reducible to brain waves inside our heads, which are themselves caused by other blind physical processes inside and outside us? According to naturalism, you can totally answer the question of why do I think this by pointing to physical biological factors. Why do I think it's raining outside? Well, because my ears hear a sound, which triggers a series of electrical signals in my nervous system, which ended in my brain being told it's raining outside. But during no part of this process did I use reason to deduce it was raining. I just had a series of physical causes play out inside of me that ended with me having a thought. As Lewis points out, physical causes for thinking something and reason are wholly distinct. To point to a physical cause for a belief is to cast doubt on its rationality. When we say things like, you only think that because that's how you grew up, or you're only angry right now because you're hungry, we're recognizing the internal conflict inherent between physical explanations for events and reason. Insofar as how you grew up, or the fact that you're hungry is an explanation for your belief, reason is not. But if physical factors like how you grew up and your eating habits can fully explain every little part of why you think what you think, then there's no room for reason to do anything to explain your thoughts. And if that's the case, then the conclusions that you have in your head are unreliable, because they came not from syllogisms and logic, but from biological factors like what you had for breakfast. And if that's the case, all rational conversation is null and void. And that conclusion is absurd. As we've already said, you can't give a rational argument to undermine reason without shooting yourself in the foot. So if the position that says that only the natural world exists leads to the conclusion that reason is unreliable, we just have to abandon the idea that only the natural material world exists. There must be something more than natural material causes which are responsible for our rational activities, for our thoughts. That's the only way to explain how reason could be a reliable source of knowledge. So each of us must have a power of reason that's not fully dependent on the natural material world. That doesn't mean it's not influenced by the material world. Being hungry does actually make me angry sometimes. What I had for breakfast can actually influence my thoughts, but it doesn't determine my thoughts. The intellect is, in some sense, different from the material world and independent of it. Now, that doesn't mean that it's fully independent. And in fact, Lewis is going to argue that while the intellect is fully independent of the material world, it's not independent of everything in existence. What Lewis is going to say is that our reasons have to be dependent on an ultimate reason. So our immaterial powers of thinking are dependent on a great ultimate immaterial power of thinking, which he's going to say is God. But let's get into that. Now, Lewis notes that there must be an ultimate standard for truth and knowledge. When we know that something's true, that truth has to be objective through all times and all places. But he makes the intuitive observation that our reasons cannot be the ultimate source of truth and knowledge. The reason for that is that our intellects are not in all times and places. We all came to being at one point in time, and we're not always using our intellects. Sometimes we go to sleep. Sometimes we just stop thinking about things. We die eventually. And in order to say that truth is not just dependent on when our intellects are thinking, we have to say that truth is independent of our intellects. So our reasons cannot be the ultimate source of truth and knowledge. There has to be something outside of us which is the ultimate source of truth and knowledge. And what could that be? Obviously, truth statements need to reside in a mind. Where else could they reside? So Lewis says there must be this ultimate great reason in which all the ideas in the world reside. That all the reasons in the world, your reason, my reason, Donald Trump's reason, all of our rational powers participate in. When we grasp something as true, we're recognizing that this truth claim resides in the great reason. Now, what else can we say about this great reason? Well, in order to be an objective standard for truth, it must be infinite, because there's an infinite number of true things, or possibly true things. And to be truly infinite, it must have an infinite amount of knowledge, power, and goodness, and therefore be all good, all knowing, and all powerful. And we've already said that any mind has to be immaterial, because if it's not immaterial, it's determined by material forces. And this mind, more than our mind, has to be not influenced by material forces, because if it was, then truth would again be subjective. Our minds can be influenced by material forces because our minds are fallible. But if truth is not going to be fallible, if truth is going to be objective, this ultimate mind must be not influenced by material forces. It must be totally immaterial. It also must be eternal, because truth is the same in all times and all places. Our minds are not. That's why this ultimate reason can't be our minds. But this ultimate reason also can't be another kind of supermind which isn't eternal. It has to be eternal, so it's the same in all times and all places. So we have this infinite mind, which is eternal, immaterial, all good, all knowing, and all powerful, and in the words of St. Thomas Aquinas, this all men call God. That's what people mean when they talk about God, traditionally. So that's the argument from reason, from C.S. Lewis. Maybe you think it's good. Maybe you don't. Let me know in the comments below. Personally, I think this is a pretty good argument. I think maybe there's some points where it could be fine-tuned a bit and revised and made stronger, but I think in general, it's a good starting point. It's an interesting idea. And if you want to hear more interesting, thought-provoking ideas about subjects like the existence of God, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel to stay informed as future videos come out and allowing me to reach more and more people. Thank you for watching, and God bless.